The Nile. From the overflow of these dark waters grew Egypt. Grew to form the topsoil that our civilization sprang from. This is Egypt today. And 50 centuries ago, the Egypt of the Pharaohs and the Exodus, the ancient Greeks and Romans, Christian Egypt, Islamic Egypt, its lifeblood is the Nile, the mother of civilizations. Egypt and the footsteps of Moses. Stretching from the Mediterranean to the hot Sudan, from Africa into Asia by way of the Sinai, the Republic of Egypt, with 65 million inhabitants, is the most populous Arab nation on earth. Egypt in the footsteps of Moses explores Cairo, city of minarets, ancient Memphis, the pyramids of Giza, the Greek capital Alexandria, the Holy Sinai, Luxor, Karnak, and the City of Dead, Aswan, gateway to Nubia, and stunning Abu Simbel. To understand Egypt fully, the scope of its history and its monumental accomplishments requires a sense of timelessness. The more one delves, the greater the sense of being suspended between reality and myth. But there is truth in these myths. Some can be seen and felt. Some are only shadows of their past. Egypt was the Nile's gift to the ancient world. But what the Nile had given it sometimes took back. For nearly 3,000 years in this swampy outgrowth, Memphis had stood, a splendid city of 2 million inhabitants. Memphis had been a city of the living, the most ancient of Egypt's many capitals. Now it has returned to the Nile mud that its countless bricks were fashioned from. Today, among the few faces of its glory is this alabaster sphinx and the fallen colossus of Ramses II, housed in a small museum containing fragments of the city's illustrious past. Within viewing distance of Memphis lies Saqqara, a city of the dead, where for over 2,000 years the rulers and the rich were buried. King Zoser of the Third Dynasty commanded his architect to build him a tomb that would last until the end of time. The result was the step pyramid of Saqqara, tiered as a stairway to heaven, thrusting into the sky, the oldest stone structure on earth. In this pyramid, the pharaoh's burial chamber was built under the structure. Treasures were sealed inside for Zoser's trip into eternity. Priestly undertakers assured themselves that the treasures were safe as long as the pyramid stood. They were wrong. Thieves found ways to break in, and tomb robbing became a theme for thousands of years to come. Approaching a desert plateau, they loom before us like distant mountain peaks. Then we are confronted by them, stark and solitary in the sand, the Great Pyramids. 50 centuries are looking down at you. You get a new perspective of time. An Arab proverb says, "All things fear time, but time fears the pyramids." The Great Pyramid of Cheops is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and the only one still in existence. As an engineering feat, it is the largest, most massive stone structure on Earth. Yet it was built before Egypt had use of the wheel. It is 45 stories high. It took 20 years to complete. The base would cover 4 square blocks of New York City. 2.5 million stone blocks weighing up to 15 tons each were placed by thousands of workmen. It rises 455 feet high. When built, these pyramids were faced with limestone that was polished to the smoothness of glass. The Pyramid of Khafre, the second highest at Giza, still has some of this polished limestone at its top. Julius Caesar stood in awe of this site, just as visitors do today. Napoleon visited too, calculating that there was enough stone in the pyramids to build a wall around France. Guarding the tomb is this ancient monument. Ancient Greeks named it the Sphinx, after a creature of their own myths. Romans regarded it as the god of death. In Arabic, it is called Abu Hul, father of terror. These names hardly capture the intent of those who created it. It faces the east of the rising sun, the renewal of each day's life. The lion's body symbolizes royalty, its head, intelligence. The face is said to be that of Khafre. Big as it is, it has known abuse by both man and nature. When the Turks dominated Egypt, it was used for target practice by cannoneers. Maybe that's how it lost its nose. A few thousand years ago, shifting sands completely covered it. It was dug out. When this was filmed, it was snuggled in a blanket of sand. Then the flooding Nile lapped at the pyramids, just as it may have when a boat, perhaps this one, offered passage to the Pharaoh on the Nile of the other world. Dismantled, it lay waiting to convey him on his afterlife voyage. Today, this 140-foot boat is housed at a museum at Giza. The Pharaoh's mummy was carried into the Great Pyramid for interment. You can go inside through an entrance roughed out by grave robbers, but it isn't advised unless you are in good shape physically. And it's eerie. Deeply below the base is a king's chamber. A distance above the base is a queen's chamber. A long chamber leads to the king's chamber near the center of the pyramid. It's built entirely of pink Aswan granite. You are standing in the heart of an ancient civilization. Only 20 miles from ancient Memphis is the modern capital, Cairo, a world-class capital. The city is growing by 3,000 people a day, and the housing shortage is acute, a mecca of Islamic scholarship. A city of snarling cars and nimble pedestrians, where a popular t-shirt reads, "I survived Cairo traffic." In culture and commerce, it is a crossroads where Africa, Asia, and Europe meet. To Egyptians, Cairo is Misr, the Arab word for Egypt. To them, city and country are simply Misr, the mother of the world. Most travelers come here by jet, and the international airport gives you a feeling that you might have arrived in a modern capital in America or Europe. This is modern Cairo. In the 19th century, France had been the strongest power in Egypt, and it brought a lasting gaiety to the more somber Arab lifestyle. There are so many skyscrapers that there is a fleeting notion that all of Egypt's monuments are of concrete and steel. That notion will soon pass. This colossal statue of Ramses II, called the Great, is a reminder of the civilization that this city is built upon. The Egyptian Museum, holding treasures of the old pharaohs, some dating back 50 centuries, the largest and most important collection of Egyptian antiquities in the world. Days are needed to take in all that is exhibited, but a single visit prepares you for the monumental wonders of ancient Egypt. Cairo's monuments don't go back to the pharaohs, they're closer to our own time. Christian and Muslim, you'll discover that there are many different Cairos. The city began here, with a Roman lookout built as a guard post on the Nile. This is what remains of a proud fort of the Roman Empire, called Babylon. Babylon in Egypt. This is Old Cairo. Christian Cairo. Egypt was one of the first countries to embrace the new religion, and for 700 years, Egyptians were fervently Christian. Today, about 11% of Egyptian population still clings to the Christian faith. Mary, Joseph, and the child Jesus, it is believed, found refuge in this part of the city after fleeing into Egypt. There are several old Coptic churches in the neighborhood. The Hanging Church, so called because its middle is suspended between two bastions of the old Roman fort, dates back to the 4th century. The liturgy of the Coptic Church is sung in the language of the Pharaohs. The Coptic Museum stands next to the Hanging Church. Here you can see how the style of Coptic painting, so simple and so direct, is traceable to the tomb paintings that brighten the tombs of the Pharaohs. Coptic Christians look and dress much like their Muslim countrymen, although some may have a cross tattooed on their wrist. They speak Arabic, the national language, just like everyone else. What makes them different is the Copts, because of little intermarriage with the Arab invaders, are the closest blood relatives of the ancient Egyptian. Arabs began invading the land in 641 BC. In conquering it, they gradually replaced the cross with a crescent of Islam. And a few miles north of Coptic Babylon founded their capital, El-Kahira. The victorious. We call it Cairo. Mazes of narrow streets, twisting passageways, courtyards, squares, a living medieval city. One of the surviving medieval cities of the Islamic world. An Islamic historian said, "He who has not seen Cairo cannot know the grandeur of Islam." This gate is all that stands of the southern walls that surrounded the medieval city. Through it is the Cairo of Islam. The Cairenes believe that the spirit of a Muslim saint hovers around the gate. They will mutter a verse from the Quran as they walk by. The sick may leave hair or bits of clothing in hopes of a miraculous cure. Once this gate was in a place of execution. A sultan was hanged here, but the rope broke twice. The third time was successful. There are 500 mosques in Cairo, their minarets gracing the skyline like silver spears. The minarets of the Sultan Hassan Mosque are the highest in the city. This mosque was built in 1362. The Sultan's mausoleum is at the south end of the mosque, but it is empty. He was assassinated before it was finished, and his body was never found. If you are limited to visiting only one mosque in Cairo, it should be the Mosque of Ibn Tulum, one of the most beautiful creations of Islam. Simplicity of design, perfect symmetry. It was built over 1,100 years ago. Al-Azhar is the prime seat of learning for the Islamic world. Begun in 970, it is a mosque, a hostel, a campus, and the oldest university on earth. The poor are given shelter here. In 1961, Al-Azhar underwent a radical updating. Women were admitted to the university for the first time, and in addition to religious studies, other subjects were introduced. 5 times throughout every day, a muezzin calls the faithful to prayer. Allah Akbar, most great is God. Islam means submission to God. It is a direct, uncomplicated faith with very little hierarchy. Rich or poor, Muslims believe they are brothers and sisters. You will discover Muslims pray in front of others unselfconsciously. They have a saying, prayer is better than sleep. About 85% of all Egyptians are Muslims, yet they are Egyptians first. The veil isn't worn as much by women in Egypt as in other Arab countries. Here, many women are well educated and active in the profession. The first words crooned to them as babies and the last to the dying is, "There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet." Yet they revere Abraham and Moses and honor Jesus. Bab el-Fatul, another of the remaining medieval old city gates, is now the central market for garlic and onion. Shopping in Cairo's souks, markets, and bazaars is an adventure like no other. Egyptians are touch people. They hold hands a lot. They embrace, jostle. They don't mind rubbing shoulders. This is a famous crafts market, Khan el-Kahili. Buyers come from all over Africa and the Middle East to shop here. Among the best buys are handcrafted metals. Alabaster and inlaid woodwork. Shopping Cairo demands bargaining skills. No one accepts the first price asked for. That's just a starter. They offer half or a third and go on from there. This is Arabic Cairo. Bargaining is just a way of getting acquainted, a comic mini-drama adding color to the daily rounds. Crowning the Cairo skyline is the Alabaster Mosque, called the Mosque of Muhammad Ali. It commands a complete view of the city. Across from Muhammad Ali stands the 14th century mosque Al-Nasir Muhammad, once a principal mosque of the citadel. The courtyard columns had been wrestled from the palaces and temples that pharaohs, Greeks, and Romans had built. Islamic architecture reached its zenith in Egypt. This is apparent in the cool, restful interior of this mosque, where arabesques in inlaid tile glitter softly. For over 2,000 years, Egypt was ruled directly or indirectly by foreigners. The stern Fatimids, the Mamelukes, ruthless rulers who had sprung from slave stock, the Ottoman Turks, autocrats all, who governed sternly, harshly, often brutally. Yet these blood-stained rulers beautified their capital with some of the most beautiful monuments of Islam. The last of the powers behind the throne was Great Britain. Then in 1952, Colonel Gamal Abdul Nasser masterminded an overthrow of the feeble Egyptian monarchy. The following year, Egypt became a republic, with Nasser heading the government. For the first time since the birth of Christ, Egypt was being governed by an Egyptian. This new mosque in Heliopolis houses Nasser's tomb. It has the air of a shrine. A shrine not only for the man, but also for the new Egypt that he did so much to bring about. Nasser was succeeded by Anwar Sadat, who strove to end the recurring wars between his country and Israel. With the sponsorship of the United States, a peace treaty was signed. Sadat was hailed as a peacemaker by his own people, but other Arab nations felt betrayed. And at this stand, while reviewing the militia, President Sadat was assassinated. This, his tomb, is a shrine to this heroic man of peace. The Nile flows northward, and over eons its heavy silt has gridlocked, forming the huge wedge of mud known as the Nile Delta. This is Lower Egypt, whose pharaonic crown looked like this. The pharaohs who ruled both Upper and Lower Egypt combined the crowns to form a double crown, emblematic of a united Egypt. The delta's rich soil is vital to the nation's economy. It supports a greater part of the population and much of the industry. Peasant farmers are called fellaheen. They've changed little since the time of the pharaohs. Change isn't easy when the patterns go back 50 centuries. Like their ancient ancestors, they are good farmers, raising as many as 3 crops in a year. They're good at animal husbandry, breeding healthy herds for meat, wool, and hides. They measure wealth in the number of one's children and the size of one's herds. Youngsters are not pressed into working for lack of child labor laws. Egyptian families are close-knit, and these little artisans cheerfully add their earnings to the family income to help make ends meet. Most never venture beyond their villages. There are 4,000 such villages in Egypt. To the fellaheen, Egypt is a universe of its own. In the northern delta, the Nile branches and empties into the Mediterranean. There, as from a seaside throne, reigns the city of Alexandria. It was its splendid harbor that turned this once small fishing town into the queen city of the Mediterranean. Alexander the Great chose it as his capital of Egypt, making it a power center of the ancient world. The Alexandrians differ from most Egyptians. Many of their ancestors were ancient Greeks and Romans who later ruled from here. There's a Mediterranean aura about Alexandria and its people that is utterly unlike Cairo. You can see why Egyptians flock here to escape the summer heat. But for some visitors, this city evokes the long history of Egypt as potently as the pyramids or Sphinx. But of what had made Alexandria one of the great cities of the ancient world, only fragments, sometimes only memories, remain. Modern buildings choke or cover what is left of the city founded by Alexander the Great in 332 BC. Nothing remains of the great library, but a Roman amphitheater in almost perfect condition has been uncovered. Pompey's pillar was really erected to the Roman Emperor Diocletian, but a 13th century crusader named it after the wrong Roman. Romans ruled and died here. The Alexandria catacombs are the largest Roman burial place in all of Egypt. Where this fort stands now, the Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, once rose 500 feet above the sea. Now, as in the past, it is the Nile that is the lifeline of Egypt. Without it, there would be no life here. To grasp fully its importance, you need to get to know it, feel its rhythms, and become friends with this river. The Nile sources are the Blue Nile and the White Nile. The White and the Blue meet in the Sudan to become what is sometimes called the United Nile, the world's longest river. The Egyptians called their river Habib and equated it with the god of fertility. 170 varieties of fish breed in its waters, perch being the most abundant. To the east and west of its fertile banks are thousands of miles of desert wastelands. The heat is torrid. Here blow the Hamsine winds that reach 90 miles an hour. From the Nile mud grew Egypt, to lay the foundation of the civilization that we know today. This river is the thread of life that Egypt hangs upon. All aboard for a great river trip. You can make a river journey from Cairo to Aswan, and from there on to Abu Simbel by air. Most voyages take from 3 to 5 nights. The vessels are comfortable and the atmosphere informal. You'll enjoy the same comfort that the characters in one of Agatha Christie's popular novels enjoyed: a Nile steamer. The riverbanks are never more than a short distance away. time isn't the tyrant that it is in the West. Ah, tomorrow, when the apricots bloom. Where there are ancient ruins en route, the steamer will make stopovers. Passengers can disembark and explore and take pictures. A first stop is Abydos, to view a magnificent structure dedicated to the god Osiris. It was built by Pharaoh Seti. Tel El Amarna is another stopover where the capital of Akhenaten, the pharaoh of the new one god, was built. Little remains. The city was destroyed by priests of the old gods. There is a stopover at the temple complex at Dendera. The big temple here is in an excellent state of preservation. Most of the ancient temples of Egypt are fragments of what they had once been, but here you can sense the wholeness of the temple, of the courtyard, of the hypostyle hall, the hall of offerings, and the Holy of Holies. This temple was built for Hathor, the oldest of the Egyptian pantheon. The Fellahin of pharaonic times were devoted to Hathor, for she was the goddess of fertility and joy. Her blessings were more herds, more children, and more fun. Feluccas, their lateen sails billowing in the flow of river traffic, skitter north and south, across like graceful water bugs. The Nile voyage can be a long handshake with the Egyptian people. The voyager gets to know the officers, the crew. "400 miles from Cairo, the steamer docks at the river town of Luxor. This is ancient Thebes with its incredible sites of antiquity. The Temple of Luxor. So stunning to the eye, so gripping an architectural feat, that when an army of French soldiers encountered it in 1799, they immediately fell into rank without orders and saluted the temple by presenting arms. The Temple of Luxor was built through the reigns of two great pharaohs, Amenophis III and Ramses the Great. This was the god Amun-Ra's temple. Once this was a place of torchlit ceremonies with hundreds of priests chanting to the clash of cymbals. Thousands of years later, it still echoes to the call of worship. In the Middle Ages, a small mosque was built on the court of Ramses the Great. A companion obelisk once stood next to this one. In 1838, it was taken to France. It is now the landmark of the Place de Concorde in Paris. An avenue of sphinxes once connected the Temple of Luxor with the Temple of Karnak. Karnak is the grandest monument in all of Egypt. Images of the gods were born through these walls amid splendid elegance. The area this temple covers is large enough to house 10 European cathedrals. Karnak was built over a period of 2,000 years, each new pharaoh adding something of his own to it, as proof of his devotion to Amun-Ra. At the south side of the temple complex is a man-made lake. The Great Hypostyle Hall is one of the crowning achievements of the ancient world. Its columns are 8 stories high. It is large enough to fit the entire Cathedral of Notre Dame. This obelisk is 10 stories high. The wealth of an empire flowed into the temple at Karnak. The Luxor Bazaar. Here, descendants of the masons and stonecutters who built Karnak will haggle over the price of beans or a bolt of cloth as shrewdly as did their ancient ancestors. On the Nile's western shore at Luxor, so as to face the dawn, sprawls the Theban city of the dead. The colossi of Memnon, faceless and mute, are here to greet you. At one time, these twin statues of Amenophis III guarded a temple complex, long since gone. Legend has it that these statues sang each dawn. Strange music came from them. Today they are silent. The Theban kings hid their tombs not under massive and obvious pyramids, but in a limestone hillside, the Valley of the Kings. To avert break and entry, mummified remains and all of the afterlife equipage were entombed in rock-hewn sepulchres, some with mazes of blind alley passages. Some to built look unfinished, others with decoy entrances, all to confuse and discourage thieves of the dead. The ruse failed. Even the most carefully hidden tombs were discovered by tomb robbers, who stripped the gold from the furnishings and despoiled the mummies. But they could not scratch these from the walls, colors so fresh, so brilliant, that they might have been painted yesterday. Some of the finest paintings are found in tombs of noblemen and workmen. They depict the jobs, hopes, and wishes of the tomb's owners, and their desire for life eternal. It is evident that not a scribe and astronomer expected bumper crops in the next life, and perhaps a bevy of dancing girls for entertainment. Ramosa, the governor of Thebes, portrayed women wailing at his funeral. Senefer was in charge of the foodstuffs for the kingdom, so it is fitting that his tomb ceiling is latticed with grapevines. The workman Simerdin desired to have his mummified remains cared for by Anubis, the god of embalming. A picture of daily life emerges in these tombs, but the kings had grander monuments, mortuary temples where priests enacted rituals to ensure eternal life. That of Ramses the Great, called the Ramesseum, is stupendous. Everything about this pharaoh was gigantic. His statue here had been one of the biggest cut from a single block of stone. But time and nature have toppled his massive statue. There are more colossal statues of Ramses the Great than any other ruler. Some believe that he was the pharaoh of the exodus of the Jews. He lived to be over 90 and fathered over 90 sons. Queen Hatshepsut's temple is set dramatically at the terraced base of towering cliffs. The shrine to the goddess Hathor is in a good state of preservation. This lady, Hatshepsut, was the third woman to rule ancient Egypt, and the first to rule as a king. Wielding royal power for a score of years, she dressed as a man and even wore the pharaonic beard. The place of truth is what the tomb builders called the Valley of the Kings. To them, the pharaohs were entombed as gods. Ramses VI's tomb is decorated in a universe of images. But it is stripped of its treasures. Other royal tombs hold treasures of beautiful murals, but all movable treasure, including the mummified remains, was the booty of thieves. Only one tomb had been overlooked by the robbers, that of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, who had died at the age of 19. This is his seal. An Englishman lived in this house by the name of Howard Carter. Carter had been searching for Tutankhamun's tomb for 25 years. Money was running out. It was November of 1922. On a hunch, Carter had cleared rubble from the steep staircase leading into the ground. It had taken him days to break through a sealed outer door. His patron, Lord Carnarvon, was right behind him. At the time, they had little idea what they were about to find would be the most famous archaeological discovery in all of the world, the treasure of Tutankhamun. Carter came across the second sealed door. He chipped a hole in it big enough to beam a light. Carnarvon asked anxiously, "Can you see anything?" Carter could hardly speak. "Yes, wonderful things." Travelers reach sites south of Luxor by river steamer or by plane, train, or motor coach. At Esna stands the Temple of Khnum, built by the Ptolemies over an earlier structure, a common practice to perpetuate the sanctity of a sacred site. It's a late structure as time is reckoned in Egypt, begun only 180 years before the Christian era. At Edfu stands Egypt's best preserved temple. It is dedicated to the god Horus, who is usually depicted as a hawk. The whole temple depicts the victory of Horus over his archenemy, Seth. Our Nile voyage ends at Aswan, gateway to Nubia and the Sudan. Rising from this rough landscape are temples of great refinement. This unfinished obelisk is 80 feet long. From here was quarried the prized pink granite that is used in so many of Egypt's monuments of the past. Today's export is electricity. It took 3,500 laborers about a decade to build the Aswan Dam. The dam harnessed the Nile's flood, channeling the waters into economic development. The trade-off was the flooding of Egypt's ancient monuments. The tiny island of Philae was studded with jewel-like temples before it was flooded. Dismantling the temples and reassembling them on higher ground was an immense job. Even more staggering was the job of reassembling the temples built for Ramses II at Abu Simbel. 50 nations and millions of people who had never been to Egypt contributed funds to this mammoth project of saving the temple. 400,000 tons of stone and masonry were cut into blocks and carefully numbered and then painstakingly reassembled 90 feet above the old site. This temple is so constructed that twice a year, on the spring and fall equinox, the first rays of the rising sun penetrate the chamber, lighting the statue of Ramses and his gods. Today, from this southernmost shrine of fertile Egypt, Ramses in fourfold, each image 6 stories high, gazes towards east. It is one of the engineering feats of all times, and the sheer beauty of Abu Simbel brands each visitor for the rest of his life. What is more, it is a fitting finale to the Nile voyage. Throughout all of Egypt, north and south, stands the legacy of this dynamic pharaoh. His image abounds. Memphis, Luxor, Karnak, Aswan. Half of ancient Egypt's monuments were built or rebuilt by him. The great question, is this the Pharaoh of the Exodus, cannot be accurately answered. But the quest for understanding the Exodus leads us to some interesting new revelations.